So before we start our spy adventure, let us first be acquainted with the unfamiliar words that you may encounter in our discussion. So the first word is weighted monetary operations rate, or the WMOR. So the BSP used this to estimate the neutral interest rate rather than the average bank lending rate, which already incorporates credit risk premium. The next one is the BSP real policy rate. So it is the interest rate that is added to the projected rate of inflation to provide the nominal interest rate. This interest rate provides insight into the actual return received by a lender or investor after a rate of inflation is acknowledged. The third word is the BSP nominal policy rate. It is a rate that is advertised by banks, debt issuers, and investment firms for loans and various investments. It is the stated interest rate paid or earned to the lender or by investor. So the fourth one is the neutral real interest rate. So the NRR is the interest rate that is consistent with the situation in which inflation and inflation expectation are stable at the inflation target and the output gap is zero and is expected to remain zero over the medium run. And the last one is the inertial Taylor rule. So the inertial Taylor rule is a monetary policy rule that prescribes how central banks should set interest rate and respond to changes in inflation and economic activity. It adds an element of inertia to the Taylor rule, allowing the BSP to make different decisions based on what is best for the country. So now that we have understand the unfamiliar words we will encounter upon our discussion, let us now start from the very beginning. A rate on loans that has no impact on commodity prices is known as the neutral real interest rate, or NRR. It avoids inflationary or deflationary pressures and is compatible with a close-out gap and stable inflation. In simple terms, the neutral interest rate balances an economy's aggregate demand with its aggregate supply. Accordingly, the NRR serves as a benchmark for monetary policy stance, indicating contraction or expansion. So a higher NRR indicates contraction, while a lower NRR indicates expansion. So the difference between NRR and policy rate indicates monetary policy's impacts on the economy. So to explain this, if the real monetary policy rate is below the neutral level, the monetary policy stance is expansionary. If it is above monetary policy, it is contractionary, putting downward pressure on aggregate demand and consequently on inflation and the output gap. With inflation running currently above target and short-term interest rates still low, economists argued that central banks need to raise interest rates at least to the level of the neutral rate. So why do you think NRR is important? Let me give you two reasons. So in the long run, central banks want their policy to match what they think the neutral rate is, but it also guides their thinking about where interest rates should be in the short term. So if the economy is operating below full capacity, they want to make sure interest rates are below neutral level so that they will help to boost the economic growth. Conversely, if the inflation is too high, they want to keep interest rates above neutral levels in order to slow things down. So the neutral interest rate, or NRR, is a crucial element of discretionary monetary policy making, guiding the economy along a sustainable growth path by maintaining savings and investments. It differs from the natural interest rate, which emerges from market dynamics and allocates resources. So the NRR is imposed by wisely chosen monetary policy and governs the overall level of economic activity at each point. So there are three time horizons for the NRR. So the first one is the short-run horizon, which is defined as the time it takes for the interest rate to affect inflation. The next one is the medium run, which is characterized as the time it takes to return inflation and inflation expectation back to the middle of the target band, the output gap back to zero, and the exchange rate to the equilibrium, assuming an absence of new shocks. And the last one is the long run, which is the time frame where all economic variables are in steady state equilibrium. So among these three horizons, the medium run is particularly important for central banks as it corresponds to the Taylor's rule. So the Taylor rule, which is proposed by Stanford economist John Taylor, links the Federal Reserve's benchmark interest rate to inflation and economic growth. It focuses on the difference between actual and targeted inflation rates and desired and apparent GDP growth rates, known as an output gap. So posted here is the formula for Taylor's rule. So correct measurement of the NRR is crucial for central banks using the Taylor rule in setting monetary policies. Incorrectly identified NRRs can lead to inappropriate policies such as expansionary stances due to weak economic growth and disinflationary market tendencies. Mismeasurement can be costly with large stabilization losses associated with incorrect measurement. Estimating the NRR, however, is not an easy job. Why? Here's the two reasons. So first, the NRR cannot be seen nor measured and has to be derived from other data, often with high uncertainty or a low degree of confidence. Second is that while NRR reflects slowly moving structural factors such as productivity and investment behavior, it is nonetheless time-varying. So note that these measurement issues are not unique to the NRR. There are many other unobservable and time-varying economic variables that monetary policymakers need to roughly estimate in order to determine appropriate policy settings, such as the determinants of household saving and consumption decisions and the level of the equilibrium real exchange rate. That the estimate for these variables are imprecise and are difficult to verify do not validate the estimation result but simply highlight the need to use different methods of estimation with different input variables in order to cross-validate the varying result. So the econometric literature on non-return of capital or NRC has grown recently with studies using various estimating procedures for small open economies. Examples include using statistical filters, state space models, multivariate regression techniques, and structural approaches. For Brazil, the long-run equilibrium real interest rate can be estimated as a function of macroeconomic variables like productivity, inflation, external vulnerability, sovereign creditworthiness, global interest rates, and financial deepening. Structural approaches such as the calibration of the first-order condition for optimal and temporal consumption have also been used in the literature. So the solution for this model resulted in the NRR as a function of a discount rate, coefficient of relative risk aversion, per capita growth, and variant of per capita growth. So Mendez used a somewhat similar structure approach for Canada using four methods. First, he used a pure interest parity approach, which assumed that the neutral rate for Canada is equal to the foreign interest rate in the long run. In this methodology, domestic factors do not play a role. Second, he employed the following neoclassical growth model. Third, he used a reduced form model where it regressed against the Canadian potential growth rate. Finally, he formulated an overlapping generation model which, under a plausible calibration of the model, resulted in a steady-state expression for the change in the interest rate as shown below. So to fully understand these equations, here's our spider tips that will explain the estimation of the NRR in the Philippines.